Black Janitor noticed symptoms everyone else ignored and ended up saving the life of a millionaire CEO. The executive elevator at Manhattan Business Tower had never stopped on the 25th floor at 3 in the morning. Yet there stood James Washington, a night janitor of 15 years, watching through the tinted glass of the boardroom as a woman collapsed onto a mahogany table that cost more than his annual salary. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries and one of the most powerful women in the country, was clearly in trouble. Her face twisted in pain, her left arm hung limply, and when she tried to speak on the phone, her words came out slurred and incomprehensible. James recognized the signs immediately. A stroke in progress. At 52, James had learned medicine the hard way. His wife, Dorothy, had been a neurology nurse for 20 years before she died in an accident 5 years earlier. During their decades of marriage, she had turned every dinner into an emergency medicine class, insisting that medical knowledge saved lives, no matter who you were. James hesitated for a second. He was the invisible janitor who cleaned offices after the executives left. Victoria Sterling was the woman whose face graced business magazines, who moved billions with a single email. Their worlds never crossed, except in the rare hallway, encounters when she ignored him completely. But Dorothy always said neurological symptoms didn't respect social class or skin color. James opened the conference room door. "Miss Sterling, you're having a stroke. Don't try to talk. Just listen to me." His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had watched Dorothy guide families through medical crises for 2 decades. Victoria tried to protest, but the words came out even more garbled. Panic filled her eyes as she realized something was terribly wrong. James was already dialing 911 as he carefully positioned her to prevent further neurological damage. "Ambulance to Manhattan Tower, 25th floor. Female patient, mid-40s, presenting with classic stroke symptoms, facial paralysis, weakness in left arm, slurred speech. Symptoms began approximately 5 minutes ago." The 911 operator was surprised by the medical accuracy from someone who identified himself as a janitor. But James calmly continued providing clinical details with the ease of a trained professional. When the paramedics arrived, they found Victoria, stabilized in the correct position, with James giving a detailed account of her symptoms and progression. One paramedic whispered to his colleague, "This guy knows more about neurology than half the nurses I know." At the hospital, while Victoria received the treatment that saved her life, James quietly returned to work as if nothing had happened. After all, he was just the night janitor, the invisible man who kept the building running while the powerful slept in their mansions. What James didn't know was that this night would change his life in ways even Dorothy couldn't have predicted. And what Victoria Sterling would discover about prejudice, medicine, and the true definition of competence would rewrite everything she thought she knew about human value. If you're following this story of how knowledge can break down barriers, that money builds. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of humanity would expose a conspiracy that threatened not only Victoria's life, but the entire power structure she represented. The next morning, James arrived at work expecting life to return to normal. Instead, he found an unpleasant surprise waiting in the employee locker room. A formal warning note taped to his locker, inappropriate use of the executive elevator during work hours, unauthorized access to corporate facilities after hours. The signature at the bottom belonged to Wilson Carter, security manager, the kind of man who measured his worth by how much misery he could cause others. James folded the paper calmly. 15 years of impeccable work, never a complaint, and now he was being punished for saving the CEO's life. The irony wasn't lost on him. In the corporate world, even doing the right thing could be turned into a crime when you were the wrong man doing it. What bothered James wasn't the warning itself, but the timing. How had Carter found out about the previous night so quickly? The hospital maintained confidentiality, and the paramedics had no reason to report details to the company. Someone was watching Victoria Sterling very closely. During the morning shift, James discreetly observed the activity on the 25th floor. Dr. Patterson, Victoria's personal physician, arrived 2 hours later than usual, wearing an expression that mixed irritation with what looked like genuine panic. Through the glass doors, James saw a heated discussion between the doctor and Wilson Carter. Dorothy's memory struck him like a blow. "Jammy," she used to say during dinner as they reviewed complex cases. When neurological symptoms appear suddenly in stressed executives, the first question should never be why now, but who benefits if this person can no longer work. Emmys had assumed Victoria's stroke was caused by stress and corporate pressure. But the tense conversation between Carter and Dr. Patterson planted a seed of doubt Dorothy would have recognized immediately. Competent doctors didn't panic when patients survived medical emergencies. They celebrated. That afternoon, James received an unexpected call. Victoria Sterling wanted to see him in her office. When he arrived on the 25th floor, the CEO looked much better, though her eyes held a sharp, curious focus, absent the night before. "James, correct?" Victoria gestured, for him to sit across from her desk. "I want to thank you personally for what you did last night. The doctor said your quick action saved my life." "I only did what any decent person would do, Ms. Sterling." Victoria studied his face with growing interest. "The paramedics were impressed with your medical knowledge. Where did you learn about neurological symptoms?" James hesitated. Talking about Dorothy always hurt. But there was something in Victoria's expression that suggested the question wasn't just polite. "My wife was a nurse specializing in neurology, 20 years at Chicago General Hospital. She taught me how to recognize emergency signs. His voice faltered. "She died in an accident 5 years ago." Victoria's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "James, can I ask you a strange question? In your informal medical opinion, did my symptoms yesterday seem natural?" The question caught James off guard. Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful women in the country, was asking a janitor for his medical opinion on her own condition. Even more unsettling, she seemed to suspect something wasn't right. "With all due respect, Ms. Sterling, that's something you should discuss with your personal physician." Her response came too quickly, her voice laced with frustration. "Dr. Patterson said it was executive stress. He prescribed sedatives and recommended a vacation." A chill ran through James. Dorothy had always said that competent doctors investigated strokes in younger patients as if their lives depended on it, because they did. Prescribing sedatives after a neurological event wasn't just inappropriate, it was potentially criminal. "Ms. Sterling," James said carefully, "had you ever experienced similar symptoms before yesterday?" Victoria froze. He continued, his tone measured. "A stroke in someone in their 40s rarely happens out of the blue. There are usually warning signs that get overlooked or misinterpreted." Silence stretched between them as she processed his words. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Persistent headaches, occasional dizziness, episodes of confusion. Dr. Patterson said it was just work pressure." James kept his expression neutral, but inside, Dorothy's voice screamed alarms. Any competent neurologist would have ordered immediate tests. The fact that Dr. Patterson ignored those symptoms meant one of two things: gross medical incompetence, or something deliberately sinister. When James left Victoria's office 15 minutes later, Wilson Carter was waiting in the hallway. He made a point of staring directly at James, his smile carrying a thinly veiled threat, as if to say, "We know you're meddling where you shouldn't." That night, as James cleaned the empty offices, Dorothy's words echoed in his mind. "Jammy, there are no coincidences in medicine. When strange patterns appear, there's always someone behind them creating those patterns. What if Victoria Sterling hadn't simply suffered a stress-induced stroke? What if someone was deliberately putting her health at risk?" James thought about the warning note on his locker. The heated argument between Carter and Dr. Patterson, the way both men seemed to know too much about confidential events. For 15 years, James had been invisible. The janitor no one noticed. But invisibility, he was beginning to realize, could be his greatest weapon against people who thought themselves untouchable. People who completely underestimated what a simple janitor was capable of observing, understanding, and, if necessary, exposing. Over the next 2 weeks, James did what his years of night work had trained him to do: remain invisible while watching everything. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears about Victoria Sterling's situation. Dr. Patterson visited Wilson Carter's office 3 times a week, always carrying a brown medical briefcase that never left the room. One evening, James, accidentally, left his cleaning cart too close to the half-open door and overheard fragments of a conversation that made his blood run cold. "The tests continue to show progressive cardiovascular deterioration," whispered Dr. Patterson. "But I'm keeping the official reports within normal parameters as agreed." "Perfect," Carter replied. "How much longer do we have?" "With the medication I'm prescribing, disguised as vitamins, I'd say another 6 months before the next serious episode. That one will probably be definitive." James gripped the cart to keep from collapsing. They weren't just neglecting Victoria's health. They were actively poisoning her. Dorothy had always said the worst medical crime was one committed by someone who had sworn to protect lives. The missing piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly from Marcus Johnson, the air conditioning technician who worked during the day. Marcus was 10 years younger than James, an Afghanistan veteran who now supported 3 children with contract jobs. "Man, you gotta hear this," Marcus whispered during a Friday shift change. "I was installing filters on the 25th floor when I overheard Carter on the phone. He was talking about Sterling Industries stock, about buying huge amounts before leadership changes he already knew were coming." James felt the pieces lock into place. Carter wasn't just an accomplice. He was the architect of the entire conspiracy. If Victoria died or became incapacitated, Carter, as head of security and emergency board member, would temporarily control the company. With insider knowledge, he could manipulate the stock market and make millions. "Marcus," James said carefully, "do you still have contacts from the Army? People who understand documentation and evidence?" Marcus studied him with the sharpness of someone who had survived combat. "Depending on what you need." "Maybe." "Why?" James took a deep breath. He had made his decision. Over the next 2 hours, he told Marcus everything: Victoria's stroke, the medical conspiracy, Carter's scheme, and his suspicions of slow poisoning. Marcus listened quietly, asking precise questions that betrayed his military-trained intelligence. "That's attempted murder combined with large-scale financial fraud," Marcus said finally. "But proving it is going to be tricky. Do you have any hard evidence?" "Not yet," James admitted, "but I know where to get it." The plan they devised was risky, but elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would use his authorized access to the building systems to discreetly install recording equipment in Carter's and Dr. Patterson's offices. James, with his knowledge of schedules and routines, would coordinate the operation during weekends when security was minimal. "One thing bothers me," Marcus said as they reviewed the ventilation blueprints. "Why didn't they just fire you after the warning? A guy who saves the CEO's life should be a hero, not someone they're harassing." James had thought the same thing. Why fire the hero right after he saves the boss? Better to keep the janitor invisible where they could watch him. "They think I'm just an ignorant employee who got lucky recognizing stroke symptoms," he said. Carter and Dr. Patterson's arrogance was staggering. During conversations James partially overheard, they spoke openly about him as the lucky janitor who wasn't educated enough to understand what had really happened. They even laughed about how he'd stumbled into something he shouldn't, but was too simple to cause real trouble. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first test of the plan took place on a Monday night. While James meticulously cleaned the 25th floor, Marcus worked silently in the ventilation ducts, installing microphones and microscopic cameras in the target offices. His precision was military grade. In 45 minutes, he had established a surveillance network that a private detective would have needed weeks to set up. "Ready," Marcus whispered through the discreet communicator they'd purchased. Now we just wait for them to hang themselves with their own words. They didn't have to wait long. That Wednesday, Carter and Dr. Patterson held a meeting that was recorded in its entirety. The content was even worse than James imagined. Not only did they confirm Victoria's gradual poisoning, but they discussed in detail how to increase the dosage to speed up the process. "The press will love this story," Carter laughed. "Young, successful CEO, tragically killed by executive. Stress. It'll spark a national debate about mental health in the corporate world, the perfect smokescreen for the leadership transition." James listened to the recording 3 times, each playback hardening his resolve. Dorothy had always said, "Knowledge without action is complicity." It was time to act. What Carter and Patterson didn't realize was that their own words had just signed their death warrants. The ignorant janitor they mocked was about to prove that true intelligence came not from degrees or social class, but from knowledge, determination, and the most dangerous weapon of all, the absolute certainty of being on the right side of justice. As James meticulously organized the evidence that would destroy them both, he smiled for the first time in weeks. Dorothy would have been proud. He had saved a life, and now he was about to expose a conspiracy that would shake the corporate world. The medicine she had taught him was not only being used to heal, but also to deliver justice in a way no court could ignore. The following Wednesday would be remembered as the day arrogance paid its final price. James arrived at work carrying something. Carter and Patterson would never suspect. 3 flash drives containing 92 hours of recordings, 15 scanned falsified medical documents, and financial evidence compiled by a former military accountant. Marcus had done more than install surveillance equipment. His army contacts included financial crime experts who had analyzed Carter's stock purchases with the precision of an intelligence unit. The results were devastating. 341 suspicious transactions, all timed perfectly with Victoria's medical episodes. But James's plan went beyond simply handing evidence to the authorities. Carter and Patterson needed to understand that they had underestimated the wrong man in the most humiliating way possible. The first phase began during Sterling Industries' monthly executive board meeting. Victoria, still recovering and faithfully taking the vitamins prescribed by Dr. Patterson, presided at the head of the table as 15 executives discussed quarterly reports. Carter sat confidently at her right, radiating the smug assurance of a man who believed he held the future in his hands. James entered the conference room with his cleaning cart, just as he had hundreds of times before. But this time, as he discreetly emptied the trash bins, he left a sealed envelope on Victoria's stack of documents. When she opened it, she found a single typed line. "The vitamins you're taking aren't vitamins. Check the bottle. Someone who cares." Victoria's expression shifted subtly, though Carter, too absorbed in presenting his financial projections, failed to notice. From across the room, James watched her discreetly inspect the supplement bottle she always carried in her purse. 15. Years of invisibility had taught him to read expressions with surgical precision, and now he saw it clearly. Realization. Victoria knew something was terribly wrong. The second phase began 2 hours later, when Dr. Patterson arrived for his weekly consultation. He had no idea that James had planted a directional microphone inside the office lamp, or that Marcus was recording everything from a van parked across the street. "How are your stress symptoms, Victoria?" Dr. Patterson asked with the false warmth James had come to despise. "Have you been taking your supplements as directed?" "Religiously," Victoria replied, but her tone carried a quiet suspicion that made the doctor shift uneasily in his chair. Actually, doctor, I'm considering a second medical opinion just to make sure we're getting the best treatment possible. James saw panic flash across Dr. Patterson's face through the microscopic camera Marcus had installed. That's completely unnecessary, Victoria. Your tests show steady improvement. A second opinion could confuse the treatment. And how curious, Victoria interrupted, opening a drawer in her desk. Because I received this today. She produced the envelope James had left along with a bottle of supplements. Someone suggests that these are not vitamins. What would you say if I sent them for independent laboratory analysis? Dr. Patterson paled visibly. Victoria, you can't take an anonymous note seriously. This is clearly an attempt to sabotage your medical treatment. Some disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble. Then you wouldn't mind if I had them tested? Victoria asked, her words sharpened with the precision of someone accustomed to high-level corporate negotiations. Well, of course I wouldn't mind, he stammered. But it's a waste of time and resources. I can assure you, Victoria raised, her hand silencing him. Dr. Patterson, in 15 years as a CEO, I've learned that when someone tries to dissuade me from checking something, that's exactly when I need to check it. The third phase was executed with military precision. While Dr. Patterson tried to convince Victoria not to test the supplements, Marcus was delivering complete copies of all the evidence to the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the State Medical Board, and the Chicago Tribune. James had insisted that Victoria know the truth before the story went public. She deserved the dignity of fully understanding how her life had been manipulated before the whole world knew. So on Friday at 5 Dow in the afternoon, James knocked on Victoria's office door carrying a briefcase that would change everything. "May I come in, Mrs. Sterling? There's something important you need to know." Victoria looked up, immediately recognizing the janitor who had saved her life twice. "Of course, James. In fact, I want to thank you again, and I also want to know how you knew about the supplements." James placed the briefcase on the desk with solemn ceremony. "Miss Sterling, what I'm about to show you will shock you, but you need to know before the press publishes the story tomorrow morning." Over the next 45 minutes, James methodically presented each piece of evidence, the recordings of Carter and Dr. Patterson discussing the gradual poisoning, the falsified medical documents, and the financial transactions proving Carter had been manipulating the stock market based on her planned decline in health. Victoria listened in growing silence, her expression shifting from surprise to horror, and finally to a cold anger. James recognized as the controlled fury of someone accustomed to wielding power. "They thought I was just an ignorant janitor," James said when he finished. "Someone who had been lucky enough to recognize the symptoms of a stroke but wasn't educated enough to understand what was really going on. And you figured it all out?" Victoria murmured, studying the evidence with the focus she would have devoted to a billion-dollar merger. "James, you saved my life 3 times. Twice from medical emergencies and once from a conspiracy. What happened next exceeded even James's expectations for revenge. Victoria Sterling wasn't just a successful CEO. She was a corporate strategist who had built an empire dealing with people who tried to betray her. On Saturday morning, when Carter arrived at the office for an emergency meeting Victoria had called, he found not only her waiting, but also FBI. Agents, representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and an investigator from the State Medical Board. "Wilson," Victoria said with the coldness of someone about to fire an incompetent employee, "I'd like to introduce you to some people who are very interested in your extracurricular activities." Carter tried to maintain his composure, but James, watching from afar through the security cameras Marcus had hacked, saw the exact moment arrogance turned to panic. "Victoria, what's going on here? If this is about some ridiculous accusation..." Victoria smiled without humor. "Wilson, They're not here to hear accusations. They're here to make arrests based on solid evidence of attempted murder, financial fraud, and market manipulation. Special Agent Martinez began reading Carter his rights as he protested his innocence with the desperation of someone who finally realized his game was up. Dr. Patterson was arrested simultaneously at his office, handcuffs closing around his wrists, as he frantically tried to delete files from his computer. The fourth and final phase was the most satisfying. On Monday, the Chicago Tribune published the full story on its front page. Janitor hero exposes plot to murder millionaire CEO. James's story, a working-class black man using medical knowledge inherited from his late wife to save the life of a white, female executive, then exposing a complex corporate conspiracy, captured the national imagination. But the real triumph came when Victoria called a press conference in front of dozens of cameras. She not only validated every detail of James's story, but also announced his immediate promotion to Director of Corporate Safety and Integrity at Sterling Industries with a salary of $200,000 a year. James Washington, she told the cameras, has proven that competence, integrity, and intelligence don't depend on degrees or social status. They depend on character. And he has character in spades. Carter and Dr. Patterson watched the press conference from prison. Realizing they had been defeated not only legally, but also humiliated publicly by the ignorant janitor they thought they could manipulate forever, their arrogance finally crumbled. The final irony was perfect. While Carter faced 25 years in prison for attempted murder and financial fraud, and Dr. Patterson lost his medical license and faced 15 years behind bars, James was being celebrated nationally as a hero, proof that true intelligence comes from the heart, not social status. Dorothy would have been proud. His medical knowledge had not only saved lives, but also exposed corruption that could have destroyed many others. And the man she had loved was finally getting the recognition he always deserved, proving that sometimes justice not only triumphs, but does so in spectacularly satisfying fashion. 6 months later, James Washington sat in his new office on the 26th floor of Sterling Industries with a panoramic view of Chicago and a sign on his door that read, Director of Security and Corporate Integrity. The man who had once been considered nothing more than an invisible janitor now led a team of 15 investigators specializing in detecting corporate fraud. The irony was delicious. The same building where he had pushed cleaning carts for 15 years now welcomed him as an executive with his own desk and a $2 million budget to implement security protocols that other companies were already studying as a model. Marcus Johnson, promoted to electronic security coordinator, entered the office carrying reports on the new monitoring system they had developed. "Man, I still can't believe we're here," he said, looking out at the glass towers through the window. "Remember when you used to clean these rooms?" "I remember every corner of this building," James smiled, signing approvals for the scholarship program Victoria had created in memory of Dorothy Washington. "The difference is that now I can change things from the inside." The Dorothy Washington program offered full medical scholarships to low-income students, with a special focus on neurology and emergency medicine. It had already benefited 120 young people in just 2 years, many of them the children of janitors, security guards, and laborers who had never dreamed their kids could become doctors. Meanwhile, Wilson Carter was serving his 25-year sentence in a federal prison in Illinois, where he quickly discovered that corporate arrogance impressed no one. His assets had been confiscated to compensate the victims of his stock market manipulations, leaving him dependent on public legal aid, the very system he had once despised when he was in power. Dr. Patterson, permanently stripped of his medical license, now worked as a medical equipment salesman, earning a fraction of what he once made as a doctor. His reputation was so destroyed that no hospital in the country would hire him, not even for administrative duties. The medical community had united to ensure he never again put lives at risk. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, transformed Sterling Industries into a national benchmark for corporate integrity. Under her renewed leadership, the company implemented independent medical protocols for all executives, anonymous reporting systems, and strict anti-discrimination policies. The stock price tripled in 2 years, proving that ethics and profit could go hand in hand. "James," Victoria said, walking into the office for their weekly meeting, "I just got a call from the White House. They want you to testify before Congress about corporate medical reform." James nodded, already accustomed to the national recognition his story had generated. Books had been written about the case, documentaries produced, and medical schools used his story to teach about the importance of clinical observation, independent of credentials. But the most gratifying thing was the letters. Hundreds of ordinary workers wrote to say how James's story had inspired them to trust their own knowledge, to speak out against injustice, and to believe that competence does not depend on social position. "You know what Dorothy would say about all this?" James asked, glancing at her photo on his desk, now in a silver frame instead of the simple holder he had carried for years. "That medicine saved more than a life," Victoria replied. "It saved the truth." James nodded, thinking about how his inherited knowledge had grown into social justice and then into systemic transformation. Carter and Patterson thought they were manipulating an ignorant janitor, but they fatally underestimated the power of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. The lesson was crystal clear. True intelligence does not come from diplomas on a wall, but from the combination of knowledge, character, and the courage to act when necessary. James had proven that competence does not recognize color, social class, or hierarchical position. It recognizes only the truth. Today, when young workers face discrimination or injustice, many ask themselves, what would James Washington do? The answer is always the same: observe, learn, document, and act, with the surgical precision of someone who understands that the best revenge is success his oppressors could never imagine. If this story of how knowledge and determination can break down prejudice has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove justice, when done right, not only wins, it transforms the world around us. Thank you.